Order, Richie, I'm not sure what I'm not sure what our protocol is.
So we have a physical quorum present in the county office building. So the first order of business would make a motion, would be a motion to allow Chip Moses to participate remotely. And my understanding is he's communicated that he would like to participate remotely for a medical reason, and there's no reason or no cause to ask to verify that or go behind it. It stands on its own.
I'll make the motion.
Second,
All in favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Second was a question.
That's right, you can.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you.
All right. Anything need to be read on the front end? I guess not now.
No, we've got a, so one question, Chip, is you're present. Where are you located? Just generally, don't need an address.
North Garden.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Anything on the agenda? Anything not listed on the agenda you guys want to bring up? Scott?
And we need to ask if we've got 2 virtual attendees.
Okay.
So we need to ask if either of them has, it wants to hit the raise hand button, please, if you have something to address the authority about under this other matters. item.
All right.
I'm not seeing any reaction.
Okay. Well, members of the public, welcome.
Maybe Mr. Hanlon, I'm not sure.
Okay. Guess we'll move on to approval of last meeting's minutes from October 13th, assuming everybody's had a chance to look at them. Do we have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. One of you two.
We're not gonna fight over that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
Did Dr. Moses vote?
Yes.
Aye, yes.
Take some of the bass out of it.
I don't have a sound man.
All right, so I'm assuming everybody has seen, you published that, you sent us the 2023 schedule, correct? Yeah. So do we need to approve it? Or we just-
Yeah, so the main reason to approve it is chiefly what it does is it schedules the January meeting.
Okay. And so we are basically second Thursday of every month. Okay. Same old. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in
And
discussion? You good, Scott?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Dr. Moses?
Aye.
and just to let you all know, those rooms are already reserved, so we're set through the year. Minor thing, but
Correct.
I apologize for being a little slow with the presentation. I'm juggling Zoom and PowerPoint at the same time.
Yeah, no, understandable. You're managing a bit here.
Are you ready for the next item on the agenda?
Please.
Which is the ACE program Henley proposal.
Richie, did you get my email on it?
I did. Did you get my response?
No.
So my response was that, Ms. Buttrick, she raised the question as to whether she had a conflict and should recuse herself because she serves on the ACE committee, which did not recommend the Henley easement, did not recommend it for purchase. And so now, of course, the Conservation Easement Authority is considering accepting that. So she questioned whether she had a conflict. My opinion is that she doesn't have a legal or technical conflict of interest because there's no financial interest in it, and she has no personal interest in the transaction. And of course, my view was the Board of Supervisors saw it fit to appoint her both to the ACE committee and to this authority, I think for obvious reasons, because of her experience and expertise. So I don't think she has a conflict. However, if she personally feels that somehow her participation undermines the public's confidence in this authority's conduct of its business, then she certainly could, she could recuse herself for that reason. But that rests on her. It's not a legal decision.
Can I just abstain from the?
Yeah.
the voting? Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think I shouldn't be on record in both places.
Okay.
You know,
But we want your input.
if you abstain, you can still give input, I think.
You always have the option to abstain from a vote, and
Okay.
it doesn't affect the quorum. So you are not legally prohibited from involving yourself in the discussion, the consideration. Your decision to abstain from a vote, if there is to be one, is your decision and yours alone.
Thank you. Right, Scott?
All right, so the proposal in question is a possible ACE easement on the Henley property, one of the Henley properties here. Tax map 40 parcel 12A, a 19-acre parcel on Whitehall Road near the intersection of Jones Mill Road. As you all will remember, of course, this is one of the applicants for the annual round for consideration for potential purchase under the county's purchase of development rights program, otherwise known as ACE. And just to give you a brief timeline of this proposal's life so far. Last year, as Richie noted, the ACE committee did not recommend approval or purchase of this easement, largely because, as I understand, Chair, you can correct me, my understanding was that the other easement that was under consideration at that time, which was very large, would have consumed all the available funds, and they thought that should be the priority. That proposal has since unfortunately dropped out. Is no longer under consideration. After the ACE committee recommended the other easement, Campbell easement, for purchase and not this one, the Board of Supervisors decided to keep the Henley easement under consideration because of its location and the resources that it has. And so directed staff to get the final appraisal, which happened. So late in 21, the final appraisal received, and it was on track. Both easements were on track at that point to be considered for purchase. Unfortunately, things changed, and in January of 22, the ACE program as a whole was paused. Not longer that, we even more unfortunately lost the ACE program coordinator, Jessica Dahl, who retired. And so nothing happened for a while until we went back to the board in June with an assessment of the history and the impacts of the ACE program. At that presentation, the board directed staff to continue working on the Campbell easement and the Henley easement, which were the two, even though the program overall was paused, we had these two easements that had never been resolved. And so the landowners were hanging out there not knowing what was happening, and we needed to resolve their situation. So the board said, yes, go ahead and take these to the appraisal review committee. We've done that. In October, the appraisal review committee accepted the appraisal to a degree on this property, although they recommended a purchase price in line with the potential of a total of 2 dwellings in the property rather than 5, because they thought that the theoretical number of development rights was not close to the actual number of development rights. So the appraisal review committee is more concerned with appraisal and value of purchase price, whereas this body is concerned as a potential easement holder and with the conservation values of the property. So in November, we confirmed that the landowner accepts the terms of the draft easement, which we sent you all last week, and is aware of the ARC's recommendation. So next steps tonight is for this body to consider whether or not they would agree to co-hold this easement with the Board of Supervisors, as normally happens with ACE easements. If the authority does decide to accept this deed and authorize the chair to sign, then we would need to go back to the board and resolve questions about finding funding to cover it and getting the board to decide on final. This body's action is on whether or not to authorize the chair to hold the easement based on its conservation values. Not really getting into the value issues, although we can discuss that. This graph chart here is the score sheet for this property under the ACE program. So the program has the scoring system set up under the ACE ordinance that assigns values to various conservation values in the property. This is what it's scored. This one actually falls just slightly short of the 20-point minimum. It's a small property, that's not too surprising. What that means is the remainder of the points need to be made up under this county fund leveraging, which sometimes is done through a grant, but in a case like this, it's more likely done through a reduction, essentially a donation of that much of the value by the landowner. They accept lower than complete purchase price based on a prorating of that leveraging amount. In any case, the main point is we've got a property that is adjacent to an existing easement, another ACE easement. Did meet the status as a working family farm. Does have road frontage on the scenic byway and is located in the watershed of public water supply. And the proposed deed would prohibit subdivision and limit residences to one, the size limit of 45. Given all that, property conservation values and the terms of the deed, staff would recommend that the authority accept the proposed deed of easement and authorize the chair to sign the deed. And I will be happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm sure Richie has some experience too. If in fact that's Mr. Henley who's on the line there and he has any comments, we can work with us.
Thanks, Scott. Questions?
Scott, as you've explained this, the ACE committee did not approve this because they had another more compelling property, not that this did not qualify. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Yes. Sherry was there. She can explain it more if she is.
Are you abstaining or would you mind clarifying?
Are you recusing or abstaining?
Abstaining.
We'll just let it lie.
Okay.
Do
But
we have a map that shows this property in a bigger context, specifically as it relates to other conservation easements in the area?
I can pull one up in just a moment while the discussion goes on.
I think that green one is
There's
under
a green
conservation.
there. That's one neighboring ACE.
Is there more?
Is that-
Yeah, I wanted to get sort of a broader context. Chip, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No, that my question was answered.
Okay. And that's a separate property owner of the piece that's under easement as well.
Yes.
Do we? In the past, we've just been a rubber stamp. I mean, if it's vetted by ACE, approved by ACE, we just pretty much, thanks for the information and we take it. Is there something different about this situation? I know the 19 acres is under what we're normally targeting, but are we still in this accept it, go hold it if it's vetted in the ACE program?
You know, there's been concern in the past that this body was or felt like it was more of a rubber stamp.
Yeah.
What the code actually says is that every ACE easement has to have two holders, the
Yeah.
board and another body. By practice, it has been this body, but you are not obligated to accept these. If you don't, then the board has the option of either pursuing another co-holder
No,
or giving up. But this body is never obligated to accept an ACE easement. And obviously, we hope it will, and generally feel like the scoring system establishes that they have sufficient conservation value to be held. But it's never mandatory that this body accept these or any other easements.
who came up with the score of 20? ACE?
It was the ACE committee in cooperation
Yeah.
with staff about 20 years ago.
Just good all.
Does the property owner have adjacent property or other property nearby?
I believe so.
He had another parcel that he offered for the ACE program, but it wasn't, under the rules, it wasn't permitted to be considered as part of this donation. And so it was declined. So he did offer it, and again, it's not an adjacent parcel, but it is, for lack of a better term, it is in the neighborhood.
If we accept the easement, what then happens?
Then it goes on to the board for them to make the equivalent decision about holding the easement and about finding the funding to offer the purchase price.
Is that tantamount to saying that the ACE program has been reinstated or not? Do we know?
No, it hasn't, because we're not actively seeking out. These were just a round of applicants that got caught out unresolved when the program was paused.
There's
The
residual
board is,
funding.
the board has paused, there's a little residual funding, not quite enough. The board has paused the program and has not allowed us or directed us to continue seeking new applicants for future rounds. So what we're doing is trying to resolve the last round that was interrupted by the program being paused. Unfortunately, we don't have the authorization to go ahead with future rounds yet. I hope we will, but not yet.
And I have one more question. So the write-up sheet had in one of the paragraphs, it had a multiplier clause or some rounding component that I didn't fully understand. I'm not sure I'd seen it before. What was that? Sure. Was that the diminution relating to the fewer than actual division rights?
Was it one of the items in this?
The score sheet there.
It was in your memo.
Yeah.
Was one of the bulleted points, though. Second bullet point speaks to the art committee's analysis of division rights eliminated.
If you put it on the screen, I can. You put it on the screen a little bigger.
Careful what you ask for. Greg.
It's an eye test because I'm gonna
Is
fail.
I was gonna say down at the bottom, usually, I can't see that close.
This part here.
Leverage it? No.
I think the second bullet spoke to division rights being eliminated.
County fund leveraging, what is that?
That's making up for, since this property scored somewhat less than the minimum 20 points. You have to make up that difference through finding the funding another way, either from a grant or from a donation of that amount by the landowner.
It came up short by 0.31 points. So they somehow translate that into $24,163.
So the art
So he had
committee,
to agree to donate.
so the art committee
A portion.
didn't agree with the point.
Otherwise, it was 19.7.
Got
So
it.
the art committee did not agree with the 0.31 because that was based on the property being able to support 5 dwellings. The art committee recommended that it could only support 2 division rights or 2 dwellings. And so that required an increase in that leveraging, and that's where it went from 0.31 to 1.81. So the art committee's recommendation is that the purchase price, of course, would be reduced by that 24,000, and they recommended the purchase that the county offer or accept an offer to sell it for 109,000. The board hasn't acted on that as far as I know,
Yeah,
but that'll be the next step.
that'll be-
Has Mr. Headley agreed to the 109?
Has he agreed to the one?
I don't have that
Yeah,
information.
I checked with him and it was in November. I sent him the draft deed and he read that and was okay with it. I told him about the ARC's decision. He wasn't happy about it, but he accepted it. So he indicated he would be willing.
All right, so all this aside, is this an easement we want to hold?
Scott, the Board of Supervisors, my recollection was interested in it because of proximity to other conservation easements. I don't know if they're,
They also were interested because of its location in reservoir water.
yes, those are the 2 big reasons. I had a quick question that the easements that you've noted, are any of those easements under this body's control or all of them?
The adjacent one is an ACE easement. I would have to pull, it would take a while. I can pull it is. It almost certainly is co-held by this body. I don't think it's one of the couple that are co-held by VOF.
And holding it, would that increase the demands on monitoring significantly?
I mean, having 2 easements, I mean, they're not exactly, they're not the same owner, but they are adjacent. It does make it pretty easy to do 2 in a day.
So this comes to this basic question. I mean, you just kind of ask it, if this had come just to us, direct, without all point systems and all that, the ACE stuff, would we entertain it? And if we would entertain it, would we probably vote on it?
Well,
It's a little
really-
different here in the sense that it's really different. The ACE isn't really. I mean, they vetted it, I guess, in the beginning, but it's been modified by the Board of Supervisors on the sides in a way. And to try to make it happen. In the past, we've sort of accepted the ACE vetting on whether it was worthy of an easement. And we took on being co-holders without applying all our tests. I mean, it can't fail, but we don't apply them all.
Right.
They haven't. So now that other question is, what if it came directly to us? Would we accept a 19.1 acre parcel, rural? Should we be asking that question?
I
Is my
think that's the
question.
fundamental question. I think that's the fundamental.
Should we be really worried about that? But the ACE doesn't have that identity as it's had in the past.
So if we saw this easement in a vacuum, what it's got going forward, it does join another ease property. It is in an area where there are conservation easements. It's small. It's only 1 parcel in its current form. And as a practical matter, we might be eliminating 1 division right and limiting the size of the structure, a piece of property that may or may not be terribly visible from the road. So again, if I were looking at this in a vacuum, I'd say, okay, I want to know where it stands in the context of other easements. I'd like a sense of the topography such that if there were a McMansion built on it, what the visual impact of that would be. You know, the benefits are skinny for an easement in and of themselves, absent that information, in my opinion.
The other question I have, if ACE is paused are they really gonna hold these? I mean, have they
Ace
done
doesn't
everything
hold
that?
easements.
Huh?
Ace is,
we hold
Ace is a
these.
committee, it doesn't hold easements.
So why do we use the term co-hold?
Because we're co-holding with
The
the county.
county of Albemarle, an easement authority of the two members.
Never saw that.
I didn't know
Peter,
that.
to your point,
Huh?
though,
I didn't
at
learn that today.
45, 43, or
Okay,
4,500
so
square feet,
the
you're not
county- I beg your pardon?
To your point, at 45, at the limitation of 43 or 4,500 square feet, I can't remember which it is, you're not gonna have, that's really doesn't qualify as a mansion.
No, but my point is absent an easement, what's the potential harm to the
Okay,
view
I got it.
shed
Sorry, yeah.
with the big old giant house?
10,000 square foot.
But if it's up on a hill, I care more than
Sure,
if it's down in the hollow.
I got it, yeah, I got you.
This property is pretty flat.
It is, it's not elevated back, like on that back side back there.
Now, is this where Whitehall Road kind of goes down the hill and makes a right-hand curve, and then that white building up in the upper left-hand corner is where you could buy apples?
No, that.
No.
No, no, no,
down-
where
If you
you
come
are
down towards
is-
the left.
You
and
gotta
back-
go down
I
this way
think
through
that
there?
if you turn left
Yeah.
here, you're going that Prozac. I think this is the Whitehall Road,
Yeah.
and I believe you're right.
If you look at the inset map, you can see
Yeah.
why it's relation to.
Yeah, but I just try to get relative to the
First
apple farm,
elementary.
the apple barn.
If you come down the down Whitehall Road.
Yeah.
And then take a right at the bottom, it's the bottom of the hill right there.
Where Buck Road is, or the other direction.
Or it's, I mean, literally just off the picture, just off the map,
But just off the map.
on the bottom left-hand side of where
Okay.
Whitehall Road comes down.
Okay, okay.
Actually,
I think,
I think you're right. I think because this is the,
isn't that where the barn is? Yeah.
Oh, this is much further into than I thought.
yeah, there's Bearwood. Okay, so yeah, Bearwood goes past the Henley apple sale barn there. And it goes back to that other easement we dealt with a while
Yeah.
back. with the barn. So, yeah, that, you're right, that is. Jones Mill comes in right here. And the
That's-
Henley's apple barn is right there.
Apple barn's right there on
Yeah,
that. So
I
that's
had
a
it-
downhill,
I had it on the wrong side.
downhill curve and,
Yep.
and this place is sitting up here. I don't know. I don't know how it's visible from the road coming the other way.
The buildings that are on that are visible from the road, but the back of the property, not so much.
Is there a building envelope or a setback or anything in this easement?
No, the ace easements are pretty bare bones.
So again, when you were scrolling over those parcels, there were a number of properties that I believe I saw Henley associated with further.
Yeah, I thought I did too.
Yeah, there's
Different
lots
members
of
of the family.
parcels in that area owned by various members of the Henley family.
Scott, you may have mentioned this earlier. Is this property currently used as a farm and under cultivation?
As far as I know, it is largely because it qualified for the working family farm points under the ACE scoring system.
That's an orchard on the road frontage on
It-
Whitehall Road.
It's a minor sticking point, but the terms of our usual easement are more restrictive than the ace easements. Did the donor potentially or the owner agree to our form or the ace form?
Who's the ace
They're-
form?
Yeah, but they're not really. Well, I shouldn't say they're not too different. The main difference is the ACE easements are not as specifically crafted as the donated easements are. They're much more consistent from one to the next.
Well, I think procedurally there's a problem here in that if the ACE committee did not approve this acquisition for whatever reason, and we do, using terms that deviate and standards that deviate from our usual criteria, that isn't particularly reassuring. And if I were a supervisor, I would be concerned about that procedure.
The ACE committee's job in that case is to advise the board on what to purchase. The board decided, the board heard what the ACE committee recommended and decided to pursue purchase anyway. final decision and what to purchase and what to hold really comes down to the board, although obviously a co-holder is required, but the board's aware of the situation and they decided to pursue purchase anyway. So I think they've heard the ACE committee, but made their own decision.
Yeah, the board is clearly supportive of this, where the committee was not necessarily so. I would think that this group could, not on this easement in particular, but in general, if there is something that you think is important to add, that this body could add it.
To strengthen the easement.
I would think, you know,
Yeah,
I mean, probably not something like more divisions or more houses, because that's probably negotiated pretty clearly, maybe even in the ordinance.
but align it more with our
But
template.
something like, you know,
Setback.
can you see buildings from the road? Would buildings be built on the road?
Right. What are the current uses of the existing structures?
As far as I know, those are all farm structures. I don't think there's a dwelling out there.
It's just a barn, isn't it?
Which,
But
that
it-
orchard to the south, is that the same property owner or not?
Can't remember. Oh, it
I
is.
think it's the same.
Well, this is Joseph T. Jr., this is Joseph T. the third.
I'm sorry, a little louder.
The one to the south is labeled as Joseph T. Jr., whereas this one is Joseph T. the third.
And the one in the south is in a trust also.
Yeah, I mean, Joseph T. Jr. was the supervisor many, many years ago and is long dead.
But at minimum, it would seem we should have a building envelope and protections of any other structures or any other natural resources that need to be included.
Yeah, I'd like to see it strengthened close to our standards. But
But are we voting just up or down, yes or no? I mean, is that what we're being asked to do, or are we being asked to change it in the way it suits us?
for realistic terms right now, it's probably up or down, yes or no, and then, but then you go the next step with that, I don't know what the terms are that we would add, but then it would probably have a similar effect as that 0.31% change had also. In terms of, I mean, the thing is, it might strengthen their charitable donation though, also.
There's no charitable donation.
I mean, the cash value,
100%
the relative.
Right, it's a-
But if we refuse it, then it's over, right? From our point of view.
From our point of view, but
I think if this body were interested in changing the terms of the easement, similar to the past, you could defer it. And I guess Scott and I could go to the donor and say, we want to treat this board like a conservation easement authority donation and bring the deed into line.
Yeah.
I don't know how that plays into.
This is very awkward because there's money involved. There's still $109,000
$1,000
has got to come from somewhere. I'm not used to that being on the table too. That's got to come from somewhere for this to actually happen.
But that's the board's.
Well, that's that's.
I
kind
know,
of the-
so that's why I'm trying to understand it. I'm not the only one in the room that just realized that the board of directors, the board of supervisors is the other co-holder. I thought an organization called ACE was the co-holder.
They're just
You're
the
saying, no,
committee.
they just advise the board.
Yeah.
And the board actually holds the easement and needs a co-holder.
Yep.
All
And
right,
we can
I'm
say.
trying to get that through, and
Right.
if that's the case, that's okay, but now we have things that were the ACE's province that we're being asked to deal with, and I don't know, it's a cart before the horse. It seems to me
Yeah.
if the board of supervisors comes up with $109,000 and says, okay, we're gonna approve this, we need a co-holder, then they would come to us. Now, we're here sitting and thinking, well, maybe we should have a little restriction on where they build and so forth. That hasn't happened that I know of. Have we ever taken an ACE
And changed.
and changed it?
Not that I'm aware
No,
of.
and that's a precedent that I'm worried about, because if ACE does come back and active, I want us to be able to implicitly trust them for what ACE does, and I don't want us to meddle and micromanage in that moving forward.
Right.
And if we say no to this, and it's still the will of the board to do this, they can just as easily find another co-holder and just,
That's
Maybe
okay.
not just as.
I
easy.
don't-
Easement is not quite the word, but.
well, not just as easily, but it's their option.
I mean, ACE has a different focus, you know, as you can
Right.
see by this scoring sheet,
Yes.
ACE is more focused on the piece of ground.
Right.
And the ordinance, I think, stipulates what the bare bones terms are gonna be, if I remember correctly. You know, it says if it's over so many, if it's over 100 acres, you have to do this, and if it's under 100 acres, this. So they don't tend to get into some of the smaller bits. I'm not sure that it's what they do, that they would be likely to do that.
Right.
These easements and the RPD easements are much more straightforward than the donated easements that you all are used to negotiating different terms on that often vary wildly based on the character of the property. All of the ACE easements are intended to be farmland preservation. I think they're just kind of designed that way.
Yeah.
So we don't get into historic preservation or large wooded areas being protected or even scenic setbacks.
Some of the
So
recent, the natural resources stuff that we focus more on.
It's,
So are there,
How did this easement happen to come under ACE instead of directly us? Was that the landowner?
Because they wanted the money.
They want
Yeah.
money. The money makes it different.
so,
Very different.
Part of the program is to assist small farm families, and they may be financially in a hole. And so this is to help preserve, to some extent, a program to help preserve the small family farm.
yeah, with the financial benefit.
And they've done this family's done historically, they're a big farming family in Whitehall, as you know. And the family has done other ACE easements in the past. Some of them so long ago that Big Joe did, one of them.
And I feel like, wasn't the Pluger property Henley property at one point?
Yes,
am I
that was, I
mistaken?
think Henley's the in-law. I think the daughter lives there with a son-in-law,
Right.
and that involved this body and enforcement action.
So here's another question, like, so when, I know that certain times that ACE easements would not qualify. But how often does it happen that ACE has said no to an easement and it still gets kicked up to us? Usually it dies with ACE when ACE says
So
no,
they didn't say no.
but they didn't say
they didn't say
yes.
Yeah,
They.
I haven't seen this particular situation happen before.
I can't get there. You know,
I
this
can't
came
get
to us
there
in a vacuum. It's just, the marginal conservation benefits are, I just don't see it. 2 division rights, limited road frontage.
I need to say that.
One
the two
parcel.
is the opinion of the ARC. The property was scored on its, basically on its 5 theoretical rights. It does have that many. Theoretically, the ARC just felt like the only 2 that could really be used.
So is it 5 or is it 2?
Speed scored as 2.
It's
Depends as planning as to whether you can fit
Right,
5 or
on
2.
paper.
We need to know that before we decide.
There's no way to know absolutely. So the ARC, they had significant concerns over the roadway and that you wouldn't be able to meet VDOT standards in order to get five houses on the parcel.
I can see that on that turn.
And so that was the basis for it, whether that's something that exists perpetually, no one can really say, but so their opinion was 2 divisions could be supported, but then there was some, I don't know what's the word, vacillation on it. And our last meetings, when one of the members said, well, who was the driving force behind the 2 said, well, I don't want to be held to the 2 because there might be 4. So
Well,
it's more of an art than a science.
So we could end up co-holding, in a way, enabling, without that, yeah, they could find someone else.
Right.
And the 2 on 19 acres
Could be full.
could be 4. I mean, there's nothing in the agreement that
stops
even
it.
limits it. I mean, this is,
The agreement with one.
No, wait, the easement, is gonna limit it to 0. I
That's
mean,
right,
come
one
on.
parcel, yeah.
Okay,
One dwelling.
okay. So they're talking about how many get extinguished.
This is just for the
So,
money.
the money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like if we were to look at it from our perspective, under our standards,
Yeah.
it would be 4 division rights. Well, you know, we speak in our language. That-
It's enough, I intentionally didn't make an ACEA donated easement score, or it's not a score sheet, a qualification.
The
sheet,
template
because I didn't wanna
qualification.
confuse things.
Right.
But if you want to freehand it a little bit, this clearly meets enough of the criteria to be considered by this body. We've had easements smaller than this.
With less, with less conservation
But this
resources.
is interreservoir watershed, has high quality ag soils, it's on a scenic byway. That's enough right there to justify being considered by this body, even if it was a donation.
Does this easement itself impose relatively the same amount, like, so I don't have it in front of me, I walked out the door completely unprepared. Relatively same limitations and standards that we hold,
Well, it's,
that we asked for in our ACA.
let me pull this map back.
It's pretty, I mean, I read it,
It's pretty basic.
it's
It's
basic, but I
basic.
mean, it's, got a
But it
lot of
covers the
bells and
bases.
whistles,
Right.
size,
A lot of the
division
features
rights,
that we
best
would want-
practices.
A lot of
On other
what?
property, a lot of the features that we would try to protect through specific terms on these properties,
Mhm.
stream buffers, critical slopes. This doesn't have those.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The streams on the adjacent property, it doesn't have critical slopes.
but it hits right into Beaver Dam.
But
Beaver
it's,
Creek Reservoir.
it's in an agricultural use, it's in an area of easements, that's the other factor that I mentioned, is it's adjacent, it's got hundreds of feet of shared boundary with another easement, so. It's not one that gives us an opportunity to hook onto those other resources and apply additional
Mhm.
restrictions that we would on a different property.
Scott, the way you've just summarized that gives us a graceful way of not taking action today, but indicating a willingness to, if it meets the usual criteria for our easement, more restrictive than the ACE
It
program.
doesn't have those specific resources that you can measure a setback from something, but it still has important resources. It's still. in the
Yes, and
reservoir
we can define a building
watershed.
envelope.
Soils.
We could define a building envelope and protect that as much as possible so that there would be, we would get closer to our usual terms or invoke our usual terms entirely.
A setback or a building envelope would probably be about the only way
Yeah.
to do that.
I'd be comfortable with the setback and the building envelope.
What's the white building there now? Is that a barn?
Barn.
So there is no dwelling place
Yeah.
on that property. So we're just talking about, okay.
Rimmer always had it, those were dormitories,
You what?
dorms. For seasonal,
Chickens.
Oh, for the
for seasonal,
workers.
No, actually, no, well, okay, at one point there was a trailer that may be gone. But
that it was housing,
yeah,
temporary.
So if I were, looking at this easement in a vacuum, absent all the rigmarole, or lack thereof, I would want to know what surrounding parcels are owned by the same family.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too. Because if so, they might,
Yeah, because it's likely that this property owner has an interest in the trust that's adjacent, but not sole owner.
I think to the north, I thought I saw additional Henley properties.
The one with the long boundary is owned, I think, by the brother, isn't it?
yes, well, it's another member of the family. Okay, so. Those three. Those three are under exactly the same ownership,
Got it.
but obviously, there are lots of other properties with Henley in the name in the area. I don't know the family well enough to know who's in what trust. It's not really my business, but
I don't see it.
so that's gonna pick up Henley for us. Which is a really lovely place.
I mean, that should be addressed in the appraisal. You should be able to look at the appraisal and find out where the
Jason,
other, what do they call it, related lands are, if there are any. And if there are any, to what degree they were considered to be pertinent from a value standpoint.
The adjacent landowner problem is certainly a red flag for a donated easement because of the IRS's concern. Has it been for the ACE program?
Only to the extent of the appraisal and
The appraisal, right, the diminution,
yeah, I mean, it's only an appraisal question, Chip, I think.
but it's also, to me, it's an intent question too.
This exact landowner doesn't have any adjacent properties.
Right.
The fact that there are related people, I mean, we don't know that they have any connection to business.
So,
But I think an appraisal must take that into consideration. And they have to account for whether there is, I forget what the exact term is,
enhancement,
enhancement.
Is that to protect against just having an easement on your front yard? I mean,
That's,
you're just holding out your, but everything around you, you put in an easement.
you're gaining benefit from it versus your neighbor gaining.
Yeah.
yeah, enhancement is basically figuring out
Yeah.
whether by giving an easement, you're actually diminishing what you
That's right.
have, or whether you're simply chasing value across a boundary line.
That's right.
Our typical example is the property at the seashore where property A is on the water and property B is the one property behind the water. And you put an easement on A and you therefore vastly increase the value of B because B becomes functionally waterfront land. But when you get into sort of the family member related lands thing in an appraisal, it's a little bit different because, brothers don't always, have a totally compatible view of, what they're doing. But I believe the appraiser has to look at immediate family ownerships.
So, so this appraisal did do that,
Okay, good.
and if I'll just skim through it.
part of the issue here is that this is a 19-acre parcel. And so if there's a greater benefit from bringing adjacent properties that are owned by the same entity into an easement, then you get a greater conservation benefit. But 19 acres in and of itself, unless there's something extraordinary
That's
about
what's curious about their mass, is the size and where it is in relation to them.
again, if it were in a densely eased area and it were high topography where the risk of unsightly house would be damaging to the view shed, that's one thing, but I think if this came to us in a vacuum, it would be a tough conversation as to whether.
So
we
here's
take it.
another question. Is this small for an ACE purchase? I don't know the record
I
on
think
ACE.
the more pertinent question is sort of what you were just getting at, which is it too small for you? I
Yeah, but
would
we
think,
take smaller easements than 19 acres.
But
this
only
is
with
anomalous
extraordinary,
from the,
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
this is much more anomalous from the ACE committee's point of view. And part of the reason that you haven't seen this problem before is the ACE easements tend to be bigger than that which has traditionally been offered to this body. So that it hasn't been an issue in the past. And we haven't gotten into things like setbacks or something so much, but with that exception, normally the ACE easements are as good or better.
If I might make a suggestion,
Please.
I would feel uncomfortable accepting this easement based on what we know now. If this were a proposal for no dwellings 19 acres, we probably would accept it.
You'd have to pay for it.
Well, I was just going to say, but we wouldn't necessarily endorse another entity paying for it. And it's a question of the value, which is not our purview. And in the light of Jay's comment, it's important that we not second guess the ACE committee and the ACE process. That's also a precedent not to set. So I would urge that we take no action, that we communicate to the Board of Supervisors and to the landowner that we would be prepared possibly to accept the easement if it comes closer to our terms, which would include in minimum setbacks or building envelopes and protection for the agricultural buildings and agricultural use as much as we can using our template deed, and that we not take action until we know that those terms are closer to what we would feel comfortable at.
Is that a motion?
I'll make it that way. A motion to not make not to accept it.
I'll second it.
All right.
Can I suggest a friendly amendment?
Yes,
Just considering the Board of Supervisors schedule and the density of their agendas. Would it be possible to come back to this body in a month to consider those types of changes and then conditionally accept the offer if it conforms to the deed that you all would approve, and then present that to the board? I just think in terms of timeliness, if we have to wait for the board to take action, to, the horse before the cart, and then we have to come back and consider it, we'll be looking at a lengthy process.
no, I think that's the most efficient way to do it is
Never
because
been waiting for a long time already.
okay,
Whatever
yeah,
way it goes.
in the interim, it says, kind of applying our standards,
Because I think
overlaying our standards on this.
if this body applies its standards and Mr. Henley agrees to accept those standards, then I think the Board of Supervisors would go along with it.
And we have that ready to look at our next meeting.
If we're in discussion, are we in discussion?
We are in discussion currently.
I would suggest that you slightly modify your motion because you can't use the exact same template. In other words, you've got a co-holder at the very least. You have to have the county as a holder here. And there are
Right,
various
that's just in
recitals
the-
and things that go
Right.
along with
And the
that.
recitals are different.
It would seem that it would, the easiest thing for everybody would be if this body has terms that it feels need to be added in order to make the easement equivalent, you should let the county attorney's office work that into the template perhaps that everybody's used to, including maybe the donor.
Yep.
And I don't know, does he have any
And that's-
counsel?
Yeah,
At least that's-
Sherry, I was not suggesting that we use our draft template as is, but rather we accomplish what you have just suggested, that we get closer
it's
to
almost
our
Yes,
template.
I just was concerned about the wording of the motion, that it might put you in a box.
Got it.
Or at least give you something you had to work yourself out of in a
Nah.
Byzantine way.
I'm just picturing it's like we're kind of laying a transparency of ours over and see where it matches up. And
I mean, it seems like Scott's saying all you really need is some limitation on where buildings are gonna go.
correct,
There's not a stream.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think they're fundamental
you
changes.
can
that are gonna
take the
happen.
original easement and add that in if it's the will of this group to
No, I
do
think
that.
it seems most efficient to change the existing one as little as possible, but implement.
Just add a building on for a setback.
Correct.
Those are what we're going to do.
I mean, you could make a provisional motion that basically accepted it.
But if we voted today, it
Under-
would not pass.
Okay.
I don't think.
Yeah, let's,
I mean, I feel I'm in agreement.
But
with Peter.
if you're trying to help with the board's agenda and all of that, you could make a motion that would say, we're not going to take it as it is, but we would take it with the following additional restrictions.
So
Then though, you wouldn't have to have so many meetings to.
that's true. I'm not sure if we're clear on what those additional restrictions would be outside of the building envelope.
Yeah, I mentioned it just because I thought that was the only one that
Right.
was surfacing here.
Big setback and build, or the building envelope would incorporate the setback.
Yeah, some limitation on the siting or buildings. one way or
So
another.
keep talking about deference to the Board of Supervisors and the ACE program. It's not clear to me that the ACE program is going to exist. And certainly it's not going to exist with Chess Goodall, who's a longtime conservationist at the helm.
It's a just in case conversation.
I'm sorry?
It's a just in case conversation.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't feel that same obligation to the Board of Supervisors. If they have an ACE program that's codified, then maybe, but at this point, there's nothing to be respectful of.
It seems to me that you should set aside the whole ACE thing. There
And
are
look
a
at
lot of
this.
warts in that particular aspect of this elephant.
But we're saying here that we need to be deferential to the ACE process as a matter of course. And I'm saying, I don't feel that same obligation because I don't know
Okay.
what the ACE process is or if it exists. So that's a slightly different.
I think what I'm trying to get at is we're working with this ACE easement. It's out of efficiency now of sticking with this, so we're not going back to the drawing board, adding what we want to it, making it efficient and moving on.
I mean, the only
Why not let them
difference,
come back with another? Why not refuse and let them come back with another? Hopefully,
why not tell them what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, maybe-
there's not much broken about this.
Well,
It's
yeah,
just
but it's not also a very good easement anyway, 19 acres with two.
Right, well, I think that's your fundamental
sure.
question. Do
uh,
you want this easement or not? Never mind the bloody ACE program.
Okay, well, then that's a different question, and I would.
Yeah, I mean, there's.
Oh,
The ACE
Siri.
program, a lot of it has to do with funding. Albemarle County's concerns, a lot of that has to do with funding and some external stuff, such as these grids and such as the question of the division rights, which we're
Right.
going to make a point not to get into, Richie.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking about the ACE part of it right now. I mean, just looking
But
at
if
it.
I were you, I would put all of that to the side.
Exactly.
The program has been paused. Just deal with it. Do you want it or not? If the board wants to pay money for it,
That's up to
that's not
them.
your problem. That's
Exactly.
their concern, I would
I mean,
say.
it's 19 acres, there are no divisions. So what are, Brett, like fundamentals of it? 19 acres, no divisions. One dwelling, we pick where it goes.
One dwelling, we can set an envelope. It's got high quality soils. It's on a scenic road. It's in a public water supply watershed.
Right. It's adjacent.
It's adjacent to, it's got several hundred feet of adjacency with an existing easement.
I mean, I feel like we can find a handful of other easements that we've done that are similar to this.
Yeah.
Also,
If there's a motion on the floor, so we at a second, so
so this has been the discussion. Can we clarify this motion again, that we're deferring?
I think so I think if Dr. Moses accepted Ms. Buttrick's suggestions, that the motion is to defer consideration of this easement until the next meeting. And it suggests the county attorney, but I would suggest Scott will work with the donor on matters related to building envelope, potentially setback. And if there are other conservation values that are of interest generally to this body, and then would address those and come back with something that would be more like a proposal, a traditional proposal made to this body for consideration and then recommendation to the Board of Supervisors in the January meeting.
Dr.
I'm-
Moses.
I'm worried about this money part. I know what you said, Chair, but this has to, to me, it has to be still an ACE easement, which we co-hold. And it's the Board of Supervisors is the actual other holder. It has to be that, and if we sort of get this around to that it meets our standards and it becomes our easement, and the Board of Supervisors sends a check to Henny for $109,000. We're not supposed to care about that? Are we starting something? That we're going to smith this into our easement that we're
Only if,
comfortable
yeah.
with. And Oh, the county taxpayer is also going to put some money on the table? I mean, there's a
Dave-
technical part here and there's a perception part.
Dave,
Most of
I-
it is the county's problem, in my view.
Huh?
Most of the problem, I believe, is the problem with the Board of Supervisors.
And that question of public expense is why we have an application process, a public review of the conservation values, a prorated purchase price by income, and an appraisal process.
It's a solidly vetted process.
Okay,
That's what the
but
ACE
we
part
are
does.
without the vetting agency or agent.
No, they've been through, it's been through those steps.
But it didn't, was it approved?
No,
It was
not by
No,
the, it was
so
not
why would we
recommended.
do it?
It's not approval,
Okay,
it's a
so- So it
recommendation.
wasn't
Right.
vetted, but wasn't approved
Yeah.
by the ACE.
was
I
not
think the
recommended.
ACE has to
But
approve
the
it.
board
before we
decided to go
can do
ahead
it.
anyway.
No, the problem is that the Board of Supervisors has overridden the recommendation of the ACE Committee. That is why I'm not voting on this thing.
That's what's making me nervous. I mean, we're not really co-holding it with,
But
The
the
group
board
that
has
vetted it
taken
didn't
responsibility here, in my view, and so it's their deal.
So to summarize the process, the administrator does the evaluation, takes the applications, does the evaluation, comes to the ACE committee and makes a recommendation. The ACE committee then evaluates the administrator's recommendation. They can re-rank them. They could do whatever in their discretion and judgment they want to do, subject to the ordinance. And then they make recommendations, which could be in the way or should be in the way of rankings to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors then takes those recommendations and they make their decision. So the administrator recommends, the ACE committee makes recommendations, and then the Board of Supervisors exercises their independent judgment, legislative authority to make decisions.
Dr. Moses, what were you gonna say?
well, I think we can simplify this. This is not a good easement. It's not a good easement, period, as Sherry has repeatedly suggested we conclude. And if it can be
I never
made,
said that.
if it can be made into a good easement,
No, I didn't. I mean, I do want to make the point that I didn't say that.
Right.
I think this might qualify for one of your typical easements for this body.
well, that's just what I was going to say. And if we are
The
to,
ACE Committee's view of it is
It's
in a-
different,
is in a different context and
Right.
therefore had a different perspective.
right?
well, the situation that we want to avoid is the one that Dave brings up, and that is that we don't want to aid and abet spending public money for a private purpose that is not related to the purposes of the original ACE committee, to preserve agriculture of family farms. We don't want this to become a wedding venue or an event facility or a brewery or who knows what, inadvertently by virtue of not having terms in our easement that would preclude those activities. So if we're going to accept it as this committee, it has to get closer to the terms that we normally use. That's my view. So I would recommend, as I think I said, as Richie summarized, that we not accept this today, but indicate our willingness to accept it in the event it can meet our usual terms. It doesn't circumvent the ACE process or the Board of Supervisors. It simply says, let's improve the value of this easement.
Plus, they have the option also of trying to find someone else who will accept it as it is.
Correct.
So it's not as if we do what Chip's suggesting, that they have nowhere to go.
But I think,
And they may be happy with whatever it is you want.
right, I
They just
think,
haven't been asked yet.
I
you
think
know?
we could fashion an easement that corresponds with what we typically and traditionally do. I think your point of, I like the term of aiding and abetting is something that we need to be aware of. But can't let it unduly influence what we would, how we would typically operate as an easement board in terms of looking at, you know, you said at this easement in a vacuum. You know, I do see the difference between somebody getting cash for it and it being deemed a charitable donation. But it does give me a little bit of heartburn. are you still, Chip, are you good with the easement, the motion as it's been stated?
Yes, as Richie summarized it.
Okay, are you all right with your second, Mr. Taylor?
For the sake of brevity, I am.
Okay.
You'll have a second chance next time.
Right, so that, is there any more discussion on this? So we will take a vote on this. See how it goes. All in favor of passing the motion as it is? Let's take a look at this next month. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And I abstain, please.
All opposed? Aye. All right. So 4 ayes, one abstain. Contrary minded. Thoughtfully so.
Different class of.
Yeah.
what we do.
I completely understand. All right, is there any new business? Scott, how easy is it for you to look up to see what we've done this year? In terms of number of easements and acreage under easement? Takes more than 45 seconds.
It will take more than 45 seconds.
Yeah, maybe that's the sort of thing we could get emailed.
Yeah,
I'm hoping
a year-end summary.
to do an annual report in
Okay.
January. covering everything.
Okay.
I think we're looking at concluding 4 this month, aren't we?
Well, eventually, the Guthrie College is finally done and reported.
The what now?
Guthrie Hall.
Guthrie Hall done this month, so the rest of it.
Very good. All right, no new business, any old business?
Did we ever totally deal with the idea of moving a certain portion of that,
Into the
community
legal.
estate tax money into an escrow for legal defense?
Yeah.
No, do you want that on the agenda next month? 'Cause
Yes,
I
please,
know-
yeah.
I know you all are interested in doing. either
We said
10
we
or
were gonna
20.
put it on, a subsequent meeting, but then I think we never did.
Don't we have an annual trigger that we put 10?
And it's always been individual actions.
Okay, all right. Just been doing it for so long that,
It was a lot of money in that fund, so we talked about putting,
yeah,
And I don't think we've put any in the past couple of years.
oh, okay.
So I think if you want to make up for that,
There's-
we can.
yeah.
There's 60,000 in there in the restricted fund now.
Bring it on. When are we gonna have this combat?
It's gonna be gradually.
We won't see it coming.
Yeah, especially if you're gonna joust with the board of supervisors.
Exactly.
Beef up your fund. I can say that from experience.
Right.
I'm gonna be transitioning out of doing the planning and development review that's been taking up most of my time for the last many years. And so hopefully I'll be able to finally get on to hiring somebody to use some of this funding to do some field monitoring.
So when do you officially transition to your new position? You did.
I still have a whole lot of planning work left over that I have to finish before.
Well, congratulations again.
So the monitoring, it, again, just to put a pin in it, I think is really important.
Oh, yeah.
And we're really the only easement holder that doesn't have an active monitoring capability that I know of. And I think that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Needs to happen. But now we have someone positioned in the right place to advocate for us. Move to adjourn.
Second.
We're out of here. Thank you, folks.
Hope to be with
Well
you in
done.
person next time.
Great, Dr. Moses, thank you.
Merry Christmas to you all.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Great holiday. Just where my laptop actually.
My friend Viva Pisto on the case.
I suppose it's really, since nothing happens, it doesn't really make any difference.
You all on the man.
Music hall?
I beg your pardon?
The music hall ACE amendment.
Yeah.
That went through yesterday to the board of supervisors.
Did it really?
That's on the consent agenda.